Carlos Sainz had a difficult start to 2024. He lost his Ferrari seat for 2025 to Lewis Hamilton and was left as an unexpected free agent. The Spanish driver has done well for several years in the Ferrari, but has generally been the number 2 to Charles Leclerc. But there's no doubt that Sainz is too talented to not be in a top team in the sport. And yet, as the 2025 silly season rolls on, Carlos Sainz has been left with few options. So has the Spanish driver been forced to reinvent himself in Formula 1? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Doors are rapidly closing. As this season has progressed, it was always thought that teams would seek the services of Carlos Sainz. The driver was made available following Ferrari's decision to take Lewis Hamilton away from Mercedes, and subsequently, at least from the media's perspective, he was turning heads of the top teams in the sport. Sainz would surely be a contender for Red Bull, the team that brought him into the sport and were facing a steep gradient in their driver lineup, or perhaps Mercedes, the team that had lost their star driver and would need to bring someone talented through the door. Or perhaps even Aston Martin could have been an option, with Alonso out of contract for 2025 and Lance Stroll's position always having at least some doubt whether the sponsors will want him to continue. But, one after the other, these options went away. Aston Martin put some pressure on Fernando Alonso to ensure he secured his future at the team, instead of waiting on a potential future seat at Mercedes. Mercedes themselves have all but confirmed that their future driver lineup will contain Kimi Antonelli, their star young driver that is already eligible for a super license once he turns 18, and may even get one before his birthday, given the FIA have opened the door, which may mean the Italian driver will be given some FP1 running before the summer break this season. In addition, regarding Mercedes, it was reported that Sainz wanted to move things quickly, whereas the team wanted to wait for Max Verstappen and then subsequently to see how Kimi Antonelli would perform in F2. So, by Monaco, it was reported that this door was closed for the Spanish driver as well. And that then left Red Bull as the only team with a potentially available seat. It felt like this was perhaps the most likely option. Carlos Sainz did a brilliant job to grab the attention of everyone in 2023, being the only non-Red Bull winner all season. And he followed this up to be the first winner not called Max Verstappen in 2024, as he won in Australia with the Dutchman retiring. Following that race, Christian Horner was asked whether Sainz would be in the picture for a seat, and he commented that with a performance like that, you couldn't rule any possibility out. And yet, around 3 months on from that interview, the Red Bull team have opted to give Sergio Perez another new contract, despite the fact that the Mexican driver is out of form and the Red Bull team are under pressure in the Constructors' Championship. This decision seems odd on the face of it, but there are many factors at play here, including the fact that when Verstappen and Sainz were teammates at Toro Rosso, their relationship was described as toxic by Helmut Marko. This was something that the Red Bull team would want to avoid repeating, especially considering Verstappen's long-term future at the Red Bull team is also in doubt following the controversy that the team has faced this year. So, upsetting the apple cart and bringing in a more talented driver would be a risky move from the top team in the sport. But equally, this decision must be seen as one that means that Red Bull might not be the favourites for the Constructors' Championships in the years to come. Fundamentally, as other teams catch up with the team in terms of pace, Red Bull's rivals have stronger driver pairings, and so they'll often secure more points from both drivers combined. So Red Bull opted to go in another direction, rather than re-recruit Carlos Sainz into their team. And once these three teams have made their positions clear, the Spanish driver was left with no opportunity to be driving in a top-tier team in 2025, and very quickly, other doors were closing. So as a result, Carlos Sainz would be put in a position where he will drop down the order from where he is currently. Between a rock and a hard place. As things stand today, there are 4 teams with seats officially available for Sainz in 2025. These teams are Sauber, Williams, Haas and Alpine, leaving the most talented available driver with very limited options. Based on the reports so far, Haas and Alpine are not options that Sainz really wants to consider. Both Haas and Alpine are not particularly competitive options, and neither seem to have strong prospects on the horizon with the power unit regulations that will be changing in 2026. Alpine are a team that have struggled for several years under the guise of Renault and Alpine, and their power unit up to this point has been the most underpowered on the grid, which doesn't bode well for the future. To add, Sainz has driven for and been rejected by Renault in the past as well, losing his seat to Daniel Ricciardo. Meanwhile, Haas are a team that is lacking investment despite lofty aspirations being spoken about in the past. Gene Haas has never backed this with investments, and even bringing in Carlos Sainz would be particularly expensive for that team. So this leaves Williams and Sauber, or the team that will become Audi in 2026. Both are currently backmarker teams on the grid and represent a massive step backwards for Carlos Sainz. So this decision is not really about 2025, but it's about the longer term prospects for Carlos Sainz. For me, both of these teams also represent a significant change for Sainz in terms of his position in the sport. He's going to go back to becoming a clear team leader, regardless of which team he ends up at, much like he had at McLaren, and his experience will be critical for whichever team he decides to join. This is not necessarily a new role for Sainz, as he's taken this role at McLaren in the past, being the lead driver in a challenger team. Looking at Sainz's options, Sauber or Audi is one that the driver has been linked with for the longest. The team are a hot prospect and have made clear long-term intentions to be frontrunners in Formula 1, and the Audi name has been successful in every motorsport series that they have entered, including recent success with Carlos Sainz Sr. in the Dakar Rally. It was reported in previous seasons that Sainz has signed a pre-contract agreement with Audi, which also adds weight to the fact that he's already considered Audi to be a real option for his future. So there's no doubt that while the Sauber setup will likely be disappointing for 2025, there are strong prospects for 2026 and beyond. But it's always been challenging for new teams to establish themselves in the sport, and Formula 1 is never an easy environment. To add, the Audi team will be creating a car for the new regulations alongside a new power unit, without the learnings from being involved in the turbo hybrid era up to this point. Sure, the new power units are a significant change, but the team will still have a steep learning curve to become competitive, and it might take some time to get to the front. The Williams project is actually being considered as a result of their team principal, James Vowles. Since Vowles has joined the team, everything has shifted. Their public perception is changing, with there being more transparency and admissions when things go wrong. Behind the scenes, the team have adopted one of the most significant transformations of any team, upgrading technology and processes used to design the car. The team has been worse this year than they were last season, but it's been recognised that this will be a long-term change for the team, and they're not expecting success overnight. What's critical in the chances for Williams is the fact that they're a Mercedes power unit customer, and there are positive rumours regarding that new power unit. The German manufacturer led the way in the last power unit shift to turbo hybrid engines in 2014, and that propelled the team to 8 world championships in a row. So should Mercedes repeat this feat and Williams continue to transform the team, those two elements may well coincide to result in a team that can very quickly move forward. What's the best choice? So with these two project options in mind, Sainz has a difficult decision to make. It feels likely that Sainz will sign a 2-year deal with his next team, a stopgap for 2025, and then hoping that he made the right choice to provide himself with an opportunity to achieve more race wins and podiums in 2026. And for me, both of these teams represent gambles for Sainz's future. Personally, I think that the motorsport pedigree of Audi must be a significant pull factor. The team will be brand new, and yes, established teams with success in other motorsport disciplines have struggled in the past, but this move also gives Sainz options. The ceiling of where Audi can get to is right at the front of the grid, should they get the regulations right and suddenly be in contention for race wins and podiums each week. But equally, they could become midfield contenders, though at least you can be sure that Audi will continue to invest into what will become their most important motorsport avenue. The ceiling of Williams, though, feels like it's never going to be quite that high. The team is smaller than many others, and while they may well now be spending at the limit of the budget cap, their facilities are a step behind many others. This is a much longer term project than just 2026, and they might not be able to catch up with some of the other teams on the grid before Sainz is past his peak in the sport. Similarly, the Williams team is dependent on Mercedes for power units and gearboxes as well as hydraulics. This means that it'll be tough for Williams to actually beat Mercedes and be one of the best teams on the grid. They will have a limit of where they can get to under their current guise, and it feels like even if they get there, it won't necessarily be a sustainable position. So if Sainz ends up at Williams, it might be a better position in the short term than Sauber and Audi. Equally, we don't know what's being discussed and shared behind closed doors. Ever since taking over, James Vowles has been incredibly impressive. He has a clear plan and intention for that team, and that will be what's attracting Carlos Sainz. Either way, Sainz is going to be a lead driver in 2025, and he won't be in the positions on the grid that we're used to seeing him. But there's no doubt that Sainz is a driver that deserves to be at the front of the grid. He's proved that time and time again with McLaren and Ferrari, but it feels like this year's silly season has just got away from him for next season.